of how to code in Decentraland. Today we're going to be going over what makes up a scene, live editing, and showing you how to edit on a local host. And then we're going to go over deploying and how to actually get your land in your scene into the Decentraland mainnet. So let's get started. We have our test folder from the last lesson. So let's open that up. Let's open our game.ts. Again, we can just start a new terminal here and DCL start that to get our preview loaded up and ready. And while that's happening, let's break down some of the code and see what's going on here. So Decentraland essentially is made up of 4 components. There's 4 elements of a scene, I should say. There's systems, entities, components, and then there's the engine. Entities are the things that make up your scene. So our cube here is an entity. You can see here our cube is a new entity. That's what makes up the scene. Components are descriptors of those entities. So if you want to add some things to define the entity, like you want to add a transform, a position, place that, you want to add a shape to that entity, a box shape, you're going to do that by using components to describe that entity. Systems are that which control entities. So you can see we have our rotator system here, which is updating, calling once per game loop. So once every 30 frames, I believe. And it's just going to rotate our transform of our entity and just cause that to spin every game loop. It's just going to spin a little. So systems control entities, components describe entities, and the engine controls everything. So the engine is what is going to show you what's in the scene. It's how you're going to interact with stuff. If you have an entity in your scene, but the engine does not render it, so you need this engine add entity. If it does not add it, it's going to be in the scene, but it's not going to be rendered. It's not going to be interactable. It's there in a way, but it's not there in another way. So the engine is really what controls all the elements of our scene. We can see here that if we change something while we have our local host open, so we have our scene here, if we change something in our code and we make the scale 1.5, so now it's getting, when we click down on our cube, it's getting our transform component, our scale Z, and now it's multiplying by 1.5 instead of 1.1. So that's going to happen live. So when we do it, you can see it actually is getting much wider now. Instead of doing 1.1, it's doing 1.5. And that changes automatically. I don't have to relaunch it. I can just, live edit on the fly. A lot of the code that you're gonna use to start is going to be in your documents page. So if you're wondering, like, okay, I understand, like, I can make a cube, but what shapes can I make? Like, what are the components? What are the shape components I can use? You can find that, all the information you can find in the Decentraland docs. So if we go to documents, 3D content essential, we can go to our primitive shapes and find what shapes we can use. So say we want to make this, our cube, a sphere instead of a box. We can go here to our where we're adding our box component and just change that to a sphere. If we go back to our preview, when we save it, oh, now we have a sphere. And it's still doing the same thing. Oh, that's kind of awkward because it spawned me right in the new sphere. But it's still doing the same thing. It's still just spawning a new sphere and changing the way it looks and editing those transform components. But now it's a sphere instead of a cube. And again, it is still called cube, but that's just the name for the entity. We're adding the sphere component. So it's going to render as a sphere. It's not a cube, but we're just calling it a cube. And again, you can find all of that information in the documents page. So say you just want to, copy a bit of code that you're unsure about, if you want to try something new, you can literally pull up the documents page and just copy code from here. So if we want to make our material a different color, we can copy this nice block of code for entities, go down here, and we already have an entity of the cube, so we don't need this. We can get rid of my entity, and then instead of adding that to my entity, we're just going to add that to cube. So if we go back to our preview, now we have a nice blue cube. Isn't that cool? A nice metallic blue cube. So yeah, you can live edit, keep it moving, keep it constant, change whatever you want. It's just going to appear right for you. If you do get the engine to add new stuff, sometimes you might have to refresh, hard refresh. Sometimes I've noticed that the engine does have problems like live rendering stuff. So some of the bigger stuff you might have to hard refresh, but generally you can just live edit. So after you have your code, you've made the changes to your code, you might say, okay, this is nice, I have my scene ready, but how do I get it into world? You do that, again, by running a command from your CLI. If we go back to our CLI using the CLI page of our documents, we can see that there is a section called deploy scene, and it says run DCL deploy to publish your scene to Decentraland. So if we run DCL deploy on our file, it's going to open up our linker app. Our linker app allows us to sign a taxation, which is going to give permission to deploy the scene. You can see here it says I don't have a permission to deploy, but that's because our scene's metadata is set to 00 in Genesis Plaza. If you change that metadata to being your own scene, you should be able to sign and deploy without a problem here. And then all you do is click sign and deploy, and it signs a transaction for you. It's going to pull up your MetaMask, and you're going to have to click sign. And then once you click sign, it will initialize that transaction, and you will be uploading to the Decentraland mainnet, provided that there are no errors in the code. If there are errors in the code, it will come up in the terminal here. So as long as there's no errors, it should be fine. But then, yes, once you sign, you should be all deployed and in world and ready for people to come see your build. I hope this was helpful. Tune in for the next lesson.
Thanks for watching, and check out our other videos to learn more about Decentraland and Web3.